Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Westland Public Library's Author Talk with Steven Collis. My name is Sarah Chesney, and I'm an adult service librarian at the library. Steven was invited to talk about his new book, The Immortals, the World War II story of five fearless heroes, the sinking of the Dorchester, and an awe-inspiring rescue. It's already out, so congratulations. It was released on May 11th. Steven Collis is a law professor at the University of Texas at Austin, founding director of the school's Religious Freedom Clinic, and founding faculty director of Texas Bech-Laughlin First Amendment Center. He received an MFA in creative writing from Virginia Commonwealth University and graduated from the University of Michigan Law School. He is the author of Deep Conviction, True Stories of Ordinary Americans Fighting for the Freedom to Live Their Beliefs. He and his wife are parents to 5 children, and I want to thank you for taking the time from them to come and talk to us this evening. So welcome. I hear you have something to get us started with our event tonight.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and it'll be a little bit strange talking to an audience who will watch this later, but that's okay. We can adjust accordingly. I may have to use you to get facial reactions to see if people are bored. So yeah, what I'd like to do is I'll introduce the book and give people a little bit of a sense of what it's about. And my publisher put together a great trailer, so I may just start right off with showing that trailer if that's okay, and then I'll just jump into a little bit of background.
Yeah.
So let me see if I can share my screen. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Great. So we'll do the trailer. The trailer's only about a minute, so it should work okay.
In 1943, a Nazi U-boat in the North Atlantic Sea hunted the SS Dorchester with more than 900 soldiers on board. Surviving a torpedo attack in these frigid waters in winter would require a miracle and the sacrifice of the men who became known as the Immortal Chaplains. Their celebrated true account is now joined for the first time in print by the largely untold story of another hero, Charles Walter David Jr., a young Black petty officer aboard the Coast Guard cutter traveling with the Dorchester. Charles bravely dived into the glacial water over and over again, even with hypothermia setting in, to try and rescue the men the chaplains had inspired to never give up. Page-turning and inspiring, The Immortals is the World War II story told in an engrossing nonfiction narrative of 5 fearless heroes, the sinking of the Dorchester, and an awe-inspiring rescue.
So that gives a good sense of what the book is about, of course.
In 1943.
I guess it just keeps going. What I'd like to do is give a sense of kind of the background until we get to the real meat of the story, and then people can read the book to really get put more meat on these bones. But I start off by framing it with Hitler's declaration of war against the United States. And one of the things he kept hitting on again and again and again in his declaration of war is how united Germany was as a people. Of course, we know that was a false unity and a completely forced unity by Nazi rule. But he kept hinting at this idea that we are united, nobody can ever stop us. And then what's interesting is most people don't know this, but later when he was off by himself, in the evenings, he would sit around and pontificate to the people around him, and there was somebody who would take down notes of everything he was saying. They thought this would be helpful to humanity in the future. And one of the things he said when he was sitting around by himself was that the United States, he had no respect for the United States because it was a completely fractured country, both religiously and racially. And his view was a united Germany would easily be able to defeat a fractured United States. And so that was kind of his view right after he had declared war against the United States, and the US was just starting to ramp up and get involved. And for all of Hitler's insanity, he wasn't completely wrong. So the United States was fractured at the time. I mean, it was then and remains today even more so the most religiously diverse country on earth. And it's also a very racially diverse country, more than pretty much every other country on earth. And so the question was, would that diversity become, the weakness that Germany could exploit and defeat us? Then, of course, I get into the story. We have what are called the Immortal Chaplains. These are 4 men: John Washington, George Fox, Alexander Good, and Clark Poling. They're each of a different religion. And they were all put together on a ship called the Dorchester to be the chaplains to about 900 men who were being sent to Greenland, and then potentially from Greenland onto the front in Europe. And then alongside their ship, and I should emphasize, each of these men was of a different religion. And this was at a time when people of different religions did not get along well in the United States. Mostly they just avoided each other. Sometimes they had outright hostility. And of course, worldwide, there was outright hostility. And so for these four men, all of different faiths, to get together and try and figure out how to work together, that was crucial to their mission. And the United States military actually worked very, very hard to try to find chaplains who could have that type of attitude. They tried very, very hard to weed out people who were going to come in and create conflict among people of different beliefs. And then you had and a Coast Guard cutter that was alongside the Dorchester. You had a young black petty officer named Charles David, who was basically a cook. And he couldn't rise up to anything more than a cook because military rules at the time didn't allow him to do that as a black man. And he was a Caribbean American. His family had come from the Caribbean and settled in New York. And he had joined the Coast Guard and ended up on this cutter. And it was really fun exploring his whole family background and being able to tell readers that and bring him to life. It's a story that's never really been told before. But the question was, when you got all of these people of different faiths, and then you get people of different races all together, would Hitler's prediction come true? We, of course, know that, looking with hindsight, we know that his prediction didn't come true. But at the time, people didn't really know what was going to happen and how well people of different religions and races were really going to work together. And they really were put to a pretty extreme test. I'll just go through some of the things that tested them. So first off, this is what the Dorchester looked like before the war. It was actually a cruise ship, and it would tour the Caribbean and other places and whatnot. And then when the war started, the Dorchester and another ship just like it got taken over by the Navy, and they painted it all green, stripped it all down to its bare parts, and used it just to ship troops all across the world. So you've got this ship traveling with the 4 chaplains and 900 troops. You've got a few Coast Guard cutters traveling alongside it. And the type of pressure they face, the type of pressure that you would think would likely force them into fighting with each other, infighting, and all the things you might expect when you have people of different races and religions together were extreme. So right out of the gate, you have something that we scholars in the law and religion field refer to as the Puritan mistake. And this is something that those of us in law school who teach religion law know all too well. The Puritan mistake, we refer to the Puritans and we often say that they came to these shores for religious freedom. And it's true, they did, but the reality is they came for religious freedom only for themselves. As far as they were concerned, everybody else could just move out of Massachusetts. So they weren't really interested in religious freedom. What they were interested in is protecting their own practice and not protecting anybody else. And we refer to that as the Puritan mistake. The problem is that almost everyone is prone and tempted to want to commit the Puritan mistake, to use the law to protect themselves and then use the law to crush their ideological opposites. And we see it again and again throughout human history, both historically and in the world today. So that was a big temptation that all of these men faced. The other one was just overt racism at the time. As I said, Black men in the Coast Guard really could rise to nothing other than being petty officers. So someone like Charles David really had no obligation to help anybody or do anything other than cook meals and serve the officers. That was what he did. And that was all that they would allow him to do, no matter how talented or skilled he was, simply because of the color of his skin. So that was an issue. There was also a lot of tension on his ship among a number of sailors who had come from the Deep South at the time. And so regularly calling him racial epithets and treating him very harshly. Of course, there were other men on the ship who came from other parts of the country that he became good friends with and who protected him. And many of them had never seen that type of racism before. So all of that was causing tension on their ship. The men from the South who weren't from the South simply had not seen this type of Southern racism. If you think about it, we're only 80 years out from the end of the Civil War at this point. You had what were referred to as the spies of the fifth column, or at least the paranoia about the spies of the fifth column. So there was this tremendous worry that the Nazis had spies all over the globe just waiting to undermine everything. And they called that the fifth column. In reality, there probably weren't nearly as many as people thought there were, but they were terrified about this. So this is a sign that was actually taken out of a shop in Newfoundland, which is one of the places these ships stopped in before they would head across the Atlantic to Europe. And you can see what they're saying here is essentially like telling crewmen, do not talk about your missions or where you're going or where your ships are headed, because there are spies everywhere and they're going to be able to find you and hunt you down in their U-boats as soon as they know where you're going. So you had this worry that the Nazis were constantly spying on you. Even people on your own ship might be spies. That was adding to the tension. Then you had the weather. When the Dorchester and the cutter that was protecting her, called the Comanche, started their way to Greenland, the wind and the ice got so bad, the sea spray completely covered every ship in this. You can just see this, just feet of ice. So much so this is an actual image of the Comanche when they're just they were worried that there was so much ice on it, it was going to cause the entire ship to sink. And so they had to go on there and chip it all away. That was adding to the tension that all these men faced, just the sheer cold and the knowledge that if even one of them went overboard, they would probably die from exposure in just minutes because the water was so cold. Finally, the biggest stressor they faced was that they knew that the Nazis were out there in wolf packs hunting them down. And the Nazis had had an unimaginably good year for them from their perspective in taking out Allied ships across the Atlantic. This man here, Karl Jörg Wachter, was the commander of U-223, a U-boat that was stalking the Dorchester's convoy. And throughout the night, as the men are dealing with the seasickness that came from the storm and the ice and all the tensions on board and not getting along necessarily because of race, they knew that underneath the water, underneath the ocean, there were U-boats, potentially packs of U-boats hunting them. How are they going to deal with that? All of that pressure leads to a moment when the U-boat actually fires on the ship. And then the question is, how are the men going to respond? And in particular, how are these four chaplains and Charles W. David Jr. going to respond with all that pressure on them when their ship gets attacked? And that's what the book is about. It brings them to life and gives you their backstories and who they are, and then brings to life what they do when the attack actually happens. And I won't go into that anymore other than to say that's what the book is for, and I hope people will buy it and enjoy it. You can get it both audio and hard copy right now. I will say this, I've got my contact information down here. You can go to my website, steventcollis.com, and click on contact, or you can email contact@steventcollis.com. And I'm happy to send, since we've got the pandemic going on and in-person book signings are hard, my publisher has made some very, very good book plates, which are, if you don't know, are very wonderful little things with sticky backs that I can sign and personalize for you. And then you get it. And if you have a copy of the book, you can stick it right into the signature page and it'll turn your copy into a signed copy. And I'm happy to personalize them for you. So if you want to buy the book and then just contact me through my website, give me your address and name and who you'd like it to, and I'm happy to send it off. So with that, Sarah, that's the end of my little presentation about the book. I'd love to address questions.
Yeah, and just as a heads up, I know some of you are here because we are giving away a copy of the free book. So definitely contact him and reach out, and if you win, and get that panel. So I want to start because one of our patrons submitted the epitome of the first question that we should always ask, but they did it much better than I can ever ask. So they say, I am so excited about this topic. Thank you. I served 2 years as a chaplain in the Air Force and my dad 33 years. Now our church celebrates 4 Chaplain Sunday annually. What led you to write this?
So first, let me say, speaking of dads, since Father's Day is coming up, what an amazing Father's Day gift, right? I'll just go into sales mode for my book.
That's fine.
So, yes, don't hesitate to think of Father's Day. What inspired me to write this book? You know, I have been a scholar of religious freedom law for quite some time now. And I was one day kind of looking back at various instances of interfaith actually working and instances in which people did not commit the Puritan mistake. And I came across the famous stamp. I'm sure the person who asked this question knows that there's this there's a stamp that was made to honor the 4 chaplains, and it says Interfaith in Action. And I said to myself, that is a story that has to be told. And then I was writing my last book that came out 2 years ago, which tries to help people understand. It's a book for lay people that brings to life various cases involving the free exercise of religion throughout United States history. And when I had originally pitched it to my publisher, I had included the 4 chaplains story in it, not because it has anything to do with the law, but simply because it shows people working together despite their differences, which is what you have to really have religious freedom. And, not compromising on doctrine, but respecting each other, if that makes sense. And when I got into the book, I finally went to my editor and I said, look, the 4 chaplains story deserves its own book. I can't put it in with this other one, or we're going to have like a 600-page tome and nobody's going to buy it, right? Or tome, and nobody's going to buy it. So he said, well, why don't we just do a second book? And so that's how this became its own book, separate. And the only other thing I'll add is I went into it wanting to bring to life the 4 chaplains again for a new generation. Other books have been written about them, but nobody had ever written much at all about Charles W. David Jr. But he played a major role. At least 50% of the people who survived the Dorchester survived because of Charles W. David Jr. And in many accounts, he got nothing more than a sentence or maybe a few paragraphs. And I just thought we cannot tell this story without bringing him to life as well. So we had originally titled the book The Immortal Chaplains, and I was probably 90% of the way through it and well through my contract when I really started to learn about Charles W. David Jr. And I called up my editor and I said, you got to give me an extension. We have to change the title. And I need to start hunting down his ancestors and other people and see if we can't bring him to life the same way we are the chaplains. And that's how it ended up becoming the Immortals, about all 5 of them and not just the chaplains. Well,
I'm really glad that you did that because, yeah, his story was just amazing. And I'm so glad that it was able to be included. Let's jump ahead to the next question. You talk in the book about how Hitler was banking on the US's religious and racial diversity to the cause of their downfall. And of course, the men in the book proved him wrong. How is this relevant to us today?
It's interesting. About 4 years ago, there was a really fascinating New York Times research article talking about how Russia in particular, but also China, was doing everything it could to cause social strife in the United States through social media by getting people to attack each other based on religion and race and gender and all sorts of things. So you had all these people in the United States fighting each other. And oftentimes what they were fighting were bots and things from Russia designed to try to get us all to turn on each other because of our differences. And that's something that Hitler was banking on at the time, but didn't have the technology to do. And yet it's something that I think some countries today are still banking on, that we live in the most diverse country on earth. And if there's one thing human history has told us, people have a hard time living alongside one another in peace when they have very real differences. And so seeing the example of these men and what they did to sacrifice themselves for people who are so very different from them, I think we can all do that. Now, we don't have to give up everything, right? But we can sacrifice some things to ensure that all of us can live alongside one another in peace. It's live and let live is a big part of the American tradition. And I don't know, I can say this as a law professor, I don't know if people truly appreciate how unique it is, both in world history, but even today in the world. It's something that we need to emulate more if we can.
I definitely agree. And I have to say that while reading this was really one of those aha moments for me. It's like when you realize that Hitler was a well-respected orator and King George VI had a stutter, and you realize, oh, those two are actually existing and competing against each other on the same stage. This was also like we had religious diversity in a time where not only religious, but a little bit more racial tolerance than say Germany. And just to hear Hitler's opinions about us, I'm like, wow, yeah, I didn't even think about that. So this book is really for anybody. It doesn't have to be specifically for if you're wanting to learn about religion. It's just great just to be like, oh, yeah, that happened at this time. It's a great new perspective. So jumping ahead, No doubt all five of these men are inspiring, but what can they inspire today? How can we follow their examples?
I think just looking for any place where we can find a way to respect other people and live alongside one another in peace. And also, I mean, I don't just mean physically in peace, because a lot of people pull that off pretty well, but also respecting each other under the law. We can find ways, you oftentimes you'll see in the United States on a number of issues where both the far left and the far right aim for laws that are going to crush everyone they disagree with. And if anyone suggests any type of compromise that will allow people to live and let live, they become the enemy of both sides. I think that's the wrong attitude to have. We've become far too polarized. We have to recognize where are those places where we can make legal compromises without making principled compromises. I mean, the one thing that's very compelling about all of these men is you think about the chaplains. They did not at once ever compromise on their own beliefs, their own practices, the things that they held dear, but where they could sacrifice of themselves to help others without compromising on their own beliefs, they did. I think we can do the same thing.
I think so too. So you talked about the Puritan mistake at the beginning. How do you think that we can overcome this?
I think it's kind of the same answer. And what's amazing about the Puritan mistake is how often it gets repeated throughout history. I often make the comment that I don't know why religious liberty scholars pick on the poor Puritans, because everybody does this. There isn't a group of people anywhere that at some point or another haven't committed the Puritan mistake. And I think just recognizing that tendency is probably the first thing. And then the second thing is asking ourselves, if we're in favor of some policy, is asking ourselves, who might this be burdening? Who might this be harming? And is there a way that we can achieve whatever goal we're trying to get at legally that doesn't also harm somebody else along the way, that we can maybe find a way to protect both groups of people? This happens a lot. So I'll just give you a really quick example. There was a case out of Oregon, actually, since we're in Oregon. There was a case out of Oregon when a law was passed preventing Native Americans from using peyote in their central sacrament, for their religious activities. And a lot of people kept saying, well, look, we don't want to have any drug abuse, so we have to just ban all these laws. But it would have been very, very easy to pass a law saying, look, we're going to ban the use of illicit drugs, but we'll give an exemption just for the Native American church to use it in these controlled religious ceremonies, and we can protect against that. That would have been a very easy way to do what I'm talking about here and not committing the Puritan mistake. But Oregon refused to do that, causing a big fight that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And eventually it happened. The Native American church got the protections it needed, but it took almost a dozen years of legal battles before they finally got that. And even today, it's a little bit not absolute.
Yeah. You did a ton of research to bring these men to life and to tell their story in a compelling way. Where did you find all of this information? Librarians love original sources. Do tell.
Yeah. Oh man, this took me all over the country. So I think all 4 time zones. So I spent a lot of time in the National Archives. So everything related to the sinking of the Dorchester that is still around from the military standpoint is in a dusty box in the National Archives. And so I had to go to DC and spend several days there just kind of poring over all that material, which is not as easy as I would have thought. It was, I mean, in some respects, it's very easy, but in other respects, I don't know, you envision being able to go to a library and get something, and I would have thought there I was trying to get, that you would think these were still top secret documents or something. Many of them did have the top secret stamp on them, but they had been declassified, 50 years ago. That was fun to see all those old documents. It was the National Jewish Archives in Cincinnati has all of Rabbi Good's papers. So his widow donated all of them there. And you're able to see all of his old sermons and manuscripts and letters and just things he wrote, and some of the robes he actually wore when he was serving as a rabbi. I tried to find and hunt down as many Anne's descendants of the chaplains and Charles W. David Jr. that I could. And then, of course, it's a lot of military history and learning about U-boats. And I found the journal of the captain of the U-boat. And all throughout every single day as he was captain, he wrote down what he was doing and where he was going, including the moments when he was stalking the Dorchester. And he would write things like, snow is falling now. And so I could track exactly where he was on the map and exactly what he was thinking right up until the moment that they fired the torpedoes. And that allowed me to tell the narrative where I went back and forth in a way that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. Finally, there's a great organization in Philadelphia called the Chapel of the Four Chaplains that serves as kind of a memorial to the chaplains and Charles W. David Jr. And they were just an invaluable resource, sending me taped interviews of survivors, people who knew the chaplains, all sorts of things that I otherwise might not have been able to get my hands on or would have been lost to history.
Did you get to go internationally to find any documents there?
Well, I did get some documents internationally. I did not have to travel to get them. It was mostly making requests and interlibrary loans. I also have to give a huge shout out to librarians like yourself at Stanford University. I was at Stanford before I was at Texas, and then at the University of Texas, because they did an amazing job of hunting down books and documents from other places that it made it much, much easier for me to get my hands on things.
Thank you, interlibrary loan.
Yes.
And then what about Charles David? Like, how did you go about your research with him?
I hunted and hunted. At first, it was just stalking people on the internet and hunting and hunting and hunting until I finally found a couple of his descendants. His granddaughter is still alive and his nephew. And then I just reached out to them and started to build a relationship. And they, are just such wonderful people and were eager to have his story told even more. He's been recognized some. I mean, the Coast Guard actually named a cutter after him. He received the highest award that the Coast Guard can give for a non-combat award right after the sinking of the Dorchester happened. So he had received some recognition, but he had never really been fully brought to life. And so it was hours and hours on the phone with them, learning their family history and how the family immigrated from the Caribbean and what led to that, studying about that great immigration from the Caribbean to the United States, and hunting down old newspapers about him and his life. Thankfully, there were reporters at the time in the 1940s who wrote stories about him and interviewed his widow. He became friends with a man on the Comanche who unfortunately recently passed away, but that man, Dick Swanson, his wife is still alive. And so I was able to talk with her and hear everything and she's got to be 95 or something, but I was able to talk with her, and she had met Charles W. David Jr.'s wife and family and whatnot. And so told me about all those experiences, which also allowed me to bring more of it to life.
Yeah, because a lot of time you miss that information. Like you said, these stories are never told in a lot of circumstances. So that's great to hear. Wow, good work. Yeah. From a librarian stamp, good research.
Right, thank you. Yeah.
So what are the challenges of telling history in a way that is both engaging engaging as a novel, like not inaccurate like historical fiction, but in actual nonfiction as engaging?
Yeah. Well, so my training, I have an MFA in creative writing, but my training is in originally was in fiction. And so I know how to write and pace a novel. And the one thing that's important to remember is anytime you're telling a real person's story, everybody's the protagonist of their own story, right? Everybody feels like what's going on in their life is the absolute most important thing ever. And they feel all the anxiety and they experience it the same way a character might in a really good novel or a good movie. And so it's capturing those emotions and what they're trying to accomplish and then telling the arc of the story. And so it's all true, but you're just trying to capture it from the individual's perspective rather than trying to capture it from some distant academic, discourse about the broader strokes of history, but really getting into the heart and soul of one person, or in this case, a few people, and telling what they were trying to achieve and then all the obstacles they faced. And that ends up being a good a good, all the components of a good piece of fiction as well. The other thing is knowing when to just skip stuff. It's okay to just give a sentence if 3 months passed and nothing happened. We don't have to bring to life all 3 of those months, right? So knowing just the pacing and when to skip to the exciting moments and the compelling moments. And that's always a challenge. I'm sure I didn't do it perfectly, but you try to do your best.
It's hard. Yeah. What was one of the more surprising parts of your research? You said that you had known the history of the 4 chaplains, but is there anything that surprised you during this time, during your research?
I don't think I fully appreciated as much as I should have the religious divisions in the United States at the time.
Yeah.
It was actually a lot worse than people sometimes think. You don't hear about it that much, but people had a hard time getting along. And these chaplains were unique in the way that they thought about the world, the way they thought about other people of other faiths. There were a lot of ministers and rabbi and others who were not allowed to be chaplains because they simply could not get along with people of other religions. That to me was surprising. On the other hand, I was also surprised to learn how much the military worked to make the chaplaincy an interfaith chaplaincy. They really worked hard at that, and they didn't do it perfectly. There was no way on earth they were going to, even today, I don't think they do it perfectly. They don't perfectly account for all the different religions and all the variety we have in the United States. But the fact that they were even making an effort starting in World War I and then moving up to World War II shouldn't be discounted. Even though they didn't do it perfectly, they worked really, really hard to try to ensure that as many people of different faiths who wanted to serve could, and that they would be represented and have someone that could help them in the chaplaincy corps.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with that while reading through your book. That was one of the, I was kind of hinting at that, like, yeah, I was very impressed with how you managed to display that, the research that went into it. I was just totally taken aback by that. I'm like, this sounded so simple and should be in all history books, and yet completely went unknown.
Yeah.
What do you want people to take away from your book the most? I mean, there's a large emphasis on Petty Charles Davis, Petty Officer Charles Davis, and these wonderful people. What do you want people to take away when they read this book?
Oh, I don't know. I try not to write too much with a specific message that I hope people get from it. I want them to get whatever message they do from it. I think more than anything, I want them to just come away with an appreciation of the humanity of each of these men and their wives and what they all sacrificed so that hundreds and hundreds of other people could live, and now thousands of people. But also, I guess, just getting a sense of what was required to actually beat Hitler. It did require people to set aside very important differences and unite for a common good, even if that meant they weren't going to get everything they wanted in the moment. And I think that's something that all of us need to think about and try to adopt again today in the 21st century. Definitely
agree with that. If there's any questions that you would like to ask, but let's do one last sales pitch. So it just came out May 11th. If anybody wants to contact you to get a signed template, if they purchase your book, I will include that information in the contact information, but yeah, below in the YouTube comments as well, if you don't mind, or as well as on our webpage so people can get a hold of you. But make your last sales pitch. Sell your book.
Hey, I would just say again, Father's Day is coming up. This is a great Father's Day gift. It's an inspiring story. It's a compelling story. I'm also going to be having a virtual book launch party on May 25th. And you can get details about it. If you just Google that, Steven Collis and the Immortals book launch party, you'll find where you can register for that. That'll be a great event. We're going to have a number of the ancestors of survivors, descendants, of survivors from the Dorchester, and it'll be a great, I think it'll be a great event, a chance to hear from some of these people. And I really hope folks just enjoy the book and enjoy learning about this story that deserves to be remembered.
And then speaking of your website, are there any other ways that people can follow you? Clearly you like writing. How can they know about your upcoming books?
Twitter's a great place. So at ST Collis, and on my website, you can find that as well, my Twitter feed. Facebook's another place. I often post publicly on Facebook and Instagram. So I'm out there. You can hunt me down easily enough with some easy internet searches. I also speak all over the country on a pretty regular clip. I'm actually be in Portland in November, speaking at a big kind of interfaith conference. So yeah, on my website, I try to keep up an updated list of all the events that are coming up where I'll be speaking.
Yeah. Well, and just remember, if you have trouble finding that information, contact your local library. We'll be able to help you.
There you go. Yes.
There's my plug.
Well done.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming out. To all those in the future, thank you so much for coming to listen. And thank you for those who are able to attend today. I really hope you do get a chance to get the book. If you don't buy it, please come to the library. We will have a copy of it, not a cool signed one, so you won't get any special messages or anything inside. But I want to thank you so much for taking this time on a Monday from your family to come and talk about your new book.
Thanks for having me. So happy to be here and so grateful to be able to talk about it and share this story.
And I will be reaching out to the winner of tonight's raffle. So I want to thank everybody for attending. And I hope you're all doing well during this COVID time. Please take care of yourself. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Night.